Ryanair's annual general meeting takes place this morning and delegates won't like the front page headlines. Disruption feared, says the Irish Times. Flight chaos, says the Irish Examiner. We're joined by Eoghan Corry, the editor of Travel Extra, to discuss both what this means for commuters and the company. First, a group of Ryanair pilots have rejected a proposed bonus scheme for management to encourage them to give up some annual leave and thereby reduce the number of flight cancellations. Eoghan Corry, president of the Irish Airline Pilots Association, spoke to BBC's Newsnight last night.
Unfortunately, the latest offers from Ryanair means it's a sticking plaster approach rather than a fundamental change to what's needed to happen. And I think that's where the point of anger is with the pilots, that Ryanair don't seem to be taking seriously the fundamental grievance about the precarious nature of the employment. There are many pilots have left Ryanair, such as the 140 that you mentioned went to Norwegian, but also many airlines throughout Europe have a holding pool of pilots, and that holding pool is where pilots have successfully completed the application process, but now they're awaiting a start date. We know that many of the pilots in these holding pools are actually Ryanair pilots waiting for a start date, and when they get that start date, they will then issue Ryanair with their notice.
As I said, we're joined by Eoghan Corry. Eoghan, RTE
Paul.
News, good morning. RTE News has seen documents which raise the possibility of a work to rule by pilots. How much trouble is Ryanair in?
It's an interesting one because there's a lot of scrambling for reputation management during the week. Michael O'Leary talking to his consumers. He's had his shareholders today. He also has the regulators in mind for his reputation, because he's putting in a binding bid for Alitalia at the end of December. And this is clearly an attempt to organise his workforce. Over the years, over the decades, there's been 3 or 4 really concerted attempts to organise, effectively to unionise Ryanair's workforce. The last one was about 3 years ago, and what IALPA will be doing and what the British equivalent will be doing is working hard in the current environment to get that moving. I'm not sure how big the threat is to consumers. Ryanair are based across a lot of cultures, with more than 40 bases. But the really interesting thing about their cancellations is that they are spotty. The vast majority of those cancellations are in Stansted, or the largest number for one airport is Stansted with over 600. And then after you go through Bergamo, Barcelona, you come down to Dublin. It tends to be in Britain, Ireland and in Belgium that the major attempt to unionise the workforce takes place, and that's clearly what's going on here, Paul.
The pilots seem to be talking tough. Anne-Marie Walsh in the Irish Independent is saying rather than jumping at Ryanair's offer of a few quick bucks, they're playing for a long-term prize, contracts to rival the terms and conditions enjoyed by their counterparts.
Maybe overstated, Paul. As I say, it's across all the bases. What the impression Michael O'Leary gave to our press conference the other day, and it may be a little bit of overconfidence on his part, but the impression was that he was looking to look for this 2-week block of leave, not because he needed it, but to weatherproof Ryanair against future disruption. The listeners may already be familiar with the 2 major issues here, but to outline them, one of them is that all the leave to be taken by March 31st has to be taken by December the 31st. And the other one that emerged was that pilots were they're entitled to take a block of 4 weeks leave. And what Michael O'Leary is talking about is buying back that option to take the 4 weeks leave and into 2 separate blocks of 2 weeks. That would actually increase his options. He would also say that he wants to solve this over a 6-week period, and at the end of the 6-week period from November, we'll get back to doing business as it happens. So this is the window of opportunity that we are seeing people like Eoghan Corry attempting to move to unionise the workforce. They haven't succeeded in the past. I'm not sure they will on this occasion.
In your view, do we understand clearly as to how this came about?
It's clear that Ryanair thought they could get through this. It's also clear that during the course of last week, and the first signs we saw of it were the Sunday before the big weekend meltdown, that they were losing flights through shortage of crew. They were the reasons that were showing up. What Michael O'Leary says is that the rostering department, there was no leave during August peak period. When it hit September, the rostering department had a pool of 30 to 40 pilots on standby, on the bench as it were, and this was inadequate to cope with the French air traffic control strike, the weather. They need 150 on standby every day, and that's a little bit more complicated than it sounds, because Ryanair is probably the first truly pan-European airline with 15, 20, 25% market share across 7 or 8 major markets. So it's not much point having excess pilots at one end of the continent when you need them at another. Clearly not enough on the bench to come into play should anything go wrong, and he wasn't blaming weather, he wasn't blaming the French air traffic control strike. He said clearly we needed more than 30 or 40, we need 150 a day, and that's what he's attempting to achieve with these cancellations, which have put 315,000 passengers with flights that don't exist anymore left to rebook or get their money back.
Eoghan Corry, editor of Travel Extra, thanks for joining us.